Hey, all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Welcome back, everybody. It's middle of December here, I guess early December. December 8th. I had to look because I've been on vacation for the last 2 weeks. I didn't know what day it was, let alone what date it is. But December 8th, and it has been a long time since we've had a regular rhythm on the podcast. So glad to be back. Sorry for the delay, everyone. And a long time astrophysicist, professor, author, Pastor Paul Wallace that we've had the privilege of chatting with you. So nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Nice to be back in the saddle.
Well, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dan's over there in Michigan. You, friend, are in Georgia.
That's right.
Georgia.
We pulled it off for you. We pulled it off for you this week, people.
Yeah. Much thanks.
Okay, yeah.
By the skin of your teeth, but yeah.
Right. Had to get you a special election because there's nowhere that I love people more than love them in Georgia. So all the goodness to all the good people of Georgia. But what is going on with voters in Georgia? I mean, look, Herschel Walker was a Minnesota Viking too, but not every great running back should be the next senator from the great state of Georgia. Who in God's name?
Despite the fact that we have two blue senators and we elected and we went for Biden a couple of years ago, we're also the state that brought you MTG.
I mean, Taylor Green, the greatest.
We really, yes. That is exactly what Georgia is.
Yeah.
You got if they got the big urban areas, Atlanta really, and then you've got the sort of the smaller cities like Augusta and Macon and Columbus, little blue circles. But the rest of it, man.
Wow. Well, congratulations. Thanks, Georgia, for again, just doing your part, pulling your weight, taking care of business.
2.8.
Hats off to you, Georgia.
2.8 points. That was the spread.
Is that what it came out to be? Okay, that's better than I hadn't looked since early Wednesday morning, and it was still like 100,000 votes or something.
That's the 100,000 votes.
Oh, 2.8.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We have a lot of people. We have like 11 million people in the state. So.
Yeah, I think 3 million people voted. Like 1.6 million people said Herschel Walker should be the next senator of the state of Georgia. I mean, just say what you want. But Herschel Walker, for all of his mental health issues, all of his doesn't know what he's talking about, was confused about what seat he was running for the other day, doesn't know if he wants to be a vampire or a werewolf.
I'll be honest with you.
Business.
I mean, I'm not excusing the guy's past because it's a horrific. I mean, he's got a terrible story, but I felt sorry for the guy in this context. He was just picked up, by Trump, and Trump hounded him for a month to run, and he just ran, and it's completely used.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and that just breaks my heart. I'm sorry. I'm not talking about the women he's messed with or the kids he's left behind.
Yeah,
that's just not the way you treat people, and he was just used, and it was.
And he went along with it, and just another of a series of bad decisions and bad actions by a guy.
And now every Republican is taking them off their phones. It's like
totally
deleting that number. It's like they're just gonna just hang them out to dry.
Well, okay, so that's our Georgia bit. So thank you, Georgia. Thanks for taking care of that. But Paul Wallace, astrophysicist, pastor, author, you're not only all of those things. You're also a professor. So how are the kids doing, Paul? We've been worried to death, some of us, about the college students who had to live the last 2 years of high school, through COVID, or as we like to say, through the end of the Trump administration. And they had to live through all that, stuck at home, and, and a million people in the country dying of a disease.
Yeah.
And now they're in college. And now you've got them as freshmen. They've now finished their first semester. These kids at Agnes Scott. How are they? How'd they do this year?
I don't teach first years. I don't teach freshmen. It just works out that way. I have virtually none.
Oh.
I teach physics for pre-medical students, and they typically don't take physics their first semester. They usually wait to their junior or senior years to take physics. Mm-hmm. And also, I teach, so that's one group that I teach. And I also teach physics majors who are upper level courses, who are, again, juniors and seniors.
Okay.
So, but there is a sense on campus that we're not back yet, but it's better than last year. Things seem a little more student engagement, but it's still not like it was before. It won't be like it was before. Whenever a new thing takes its place, it'll be different. But I can say that overall, it's been a really good semester for me, and at least I've enjoyed this semester more than I think I have in a long time.
Oh, well, great. That's because you got that fancy new office you're sitting in, which is up inside of the space.
That's really all that it is. It's my new office.
All right, so gentlemen,
made over here, Joaquin the bearded dragon.
Yeah, I mean, could you be more classic professor than having an aquarium with a bearded dragon over your left shoulder?
A bearded dragon.
Right, so, gentlemen, I had an epiphany. I had an absolute epiphany on the airplane coming home from vacation as to why America is the way that it is. It all came together.
Please tell us.
Like what happened? What became, as Jackson Brown said, what became of the dreams that made us? What happened in this country? How did we move from, the thrusts of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the social movements? How did we then end up, where we are now? What's happened to our generation, Paul, people of our age? What's gone on? How did this all come about? And I've concluded it's trauma driven by the movie Jaws. Didn't see this coming. I'll tell you, I didn't see it coming.
If you'd have told me to guess 100 things, I would have been nowhere near the movie Jaws.
All right. Well, when was the last time you watched the movie Jaws?
10 years ago.
Okay, because I watched it on an airplane, and the last time I watched
arguably the safest place to watch it,
right?
Unless you were flying over an ocean.
Yeah.
Last time I think I watched it, I don't know, 1975 when I was 9 years old in a movie theater.
Wow, that's pretty young for that movie.
Tell me about it, Paul. This is not a children's movie.
No.
Kids should not be watching Jaws. As a child, we at the swimming pool in the apartment complex that I grew up in, we played Jaws all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe other people did too. You'd float along and then you'd do that little head jerk and like the girl does when she's going to get pulled out. Like, it's so iconic in my brain. I can totally remember the scenes like that. And I remembered how the thing ended. It's a terrifying movie. It holds up. I got to tell you, Steven Spielberg back in 75 made a film, but it is a full-on adult level film. First of all, it's more than 2 hours long. So how in the world did a 9-year-old sit in a movie theater? It's really quite boring. Like, the storyline doesn't get, it just scares the life out of you.
And it's kind of a slow burn. It's kind of a slow, the development's kind of slow, isn't it?
Totally. And there's this point where there's a ship captain. If you haven't seen the movie already, look, it's a little late to call spoiler alerts. It's been since 1975. But there's a ship captain who's this gruff and, sort of classic seaman captain that is out on the boat with the two heroes of the story. One of them, Dreyfus, and can't remember who the other actor is. So it's just the three of them on the boat. And this captain is telling stories about how he got these shark bites and different things on his body. And he's talking about when he was in World War II and out in the ocean, and that he was in a I remember him saying this like as a kid when I was watching it. It's kind of coming back to me. He recounts, in the movie, how their submarine was sent out to help deliver the bomb on Hiroshima. Yeah,
submarine.
I don't remember that.
Somehow the submarine is a part of
ship sinking, and then they're in the life raft or like holding on to stuff, and then the sharks start picking them off one by one.
That he ate 300 of them in and out, like this whole thing, right? Well, the subtext of what he's getting at is they delivered the bomb on Hiroshima, and then in the end he says, the shark ate 300 of the 1,000 of us, the sharks out there. But we delivered the bomb. I'm just like, oh my goodness. First of all, it's terrifying. It's such a slow burn. And then they're drilling into your brain. It's okay to be eaten by sharks because you dropped the bomb on the innocent people in Japan.
Yikes.
This movie is it. And I'm like, there it is. All my little trauma and there's a whole generation of us that were deeply
also
affected.
Some great quotes though. You got the "take them along for ballast, chief,"
Yeah.
And they decide to bring, and then of course you're gonna need a bigger boat, which is
Gonna need a bigger
one of
boat,
the greatest lines.
And
in movie
smile,
history.
you son of a bitch. Yeah, I mean, see, this is what I'm saying. Like when you're a kid, this stuff is in your head, and everything else around it, just darkness, and fear and trauma.
Our 20-year-old, who's now 20, saw it when she was about that age. I don't know how she saw it, maybe at a friend's house or something. But it did to her what you're talking about. She was terrified. We went to the beach. Like, come on in, baby. Said, no,
nope.
no.
Because the other thing they did in the movie, very 1975, they have 2 kids get eaten by sharks, and the first 2 victims are children.
Children, yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like you wouldn't do that. Like in a movie now, someone would be like, hey, let's make it like a 20-year-old and then like a 46-year-old. No. They got
go for the kids first. Yeah, it was
that 16-year-old girl on the beach that went running out there. You know, she just. I mean, I had a crush on her when I was 9. When she came across the sand dunes, running and flirting with the guy to run in the water. Like, oh, I totally remember her. And then she's eaten by a shark. First 3 minutes.
Yeah. See, that's what it'll get. Yeah, I would totally go in the water with her, and
even if there was a shark.
Even if there was a shark. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
But hey, we didn't come here just to talk about classic movies from the 70s. We also came here to talk about the moon. And it's been 50 years since we've put human boots on the moon.
The last time.
But we just started a mission, Artemis, where we circled the moon, and in a couple years we're going to land on it with people again, which is pretty exciting. Paul, what do you think of all this?
I like the idea of going to the moon. I like it. I'm all for it, and it's going to be too long though. It's like your headline says here. I was reading about why this is. Apparently, it was just some
budget thing,
that and had to do with like changes in administrations or something. Like they had one plan and then they switched to another plan.
Yeah, then they're building a second launch tower, but it doesn't match up, so they have to borrow parts from this lander that just flew around the moon. They have to like strip it for parts, refurbish them, and put them in the next.
Seriously.
Yeah. That's why. I mean, because it's weird because you have this one shot and it proves that it works, but then you got to wait 2 or 3 years, 2 years, say, for the next one, and that kind of I think you should follow it up like in a month.
Lose your buzz.
Yeah, lose your buzz. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, and in one of the articles I was reading, it was saying because of this gap, like people have to relearn how to do things for the next mission. Like you go 2 years without doing something, and you're like, staff has left. You have to train new people how to do the things that.
And even people who haven't left. I mean, after 2 or 3 years, you have to basically go back to school again to remember, what to do. So it's a little unfortunate, but I am excited I'm very excited by the pictures like the one that's here on the screen. Those images that they got are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal shots.
Now, Paul, tell us a little bit about like why we're going back to the moon now after 50 years.
As I understand it, we're going back on to the moon this time, not just to drive lunar rovers around and come back, but to go and stay, sort of like we're keeping the the space station. There's always somebody in the space station. I think the idea here is to do the same thing with the moon, to go back and to sort of establish a more permanent presence there.
Wow.
And the long game, of course, is the other M word, which is Mars.
Has there been, and now we follow this, we've been talking about going to the moon, Paul, on some version of a podcast with you for years, truly years. Like some kid was in 9th grade and we started talking about it. They've since graduated, have a doctorate and are teaching somewhere. We've been talking about going to the moon for so long with you. It's happening. But has anybody really said out loud, because I haven't heard any cultural pushback on, do we really want people living on the moon? Like, doesn't that feel a little, I don't know, like that's a Rubicon we don't want to cross? Like I see people in low space orbit in the space station. Okay. Sort of all right. They're floating around out there. But I don't know. Once you like take up, semi-permanent or permanent space on the moon, that's a real move, isn't it?
It is, but why would you call it a Rubicon? Is it just feel like it's just just such a new bold thing, um, or
Yeah,
what?
I mean, I guess it feels like, I guess it feels like when I was a kid 50 years ago, someone went there, walked on it, and then came back, and everyone's like, "Holy cats! They walked on the moon." Now someone's like, "Hey, let's just go up there and like build something
Yeah,
and stay there." It feels like it's crossing into a new kind of presence.
yeah. Oh,
Off,
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah, like,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, there's beautiful places in the country, in the on the planet now that we preserve, and people can't like live there. You could go visit, but you can't like stay.
Well, that's
And I
part.
don't know.
Yeah, that is one lesson I think that we need to learn, and I don't know. Pay attention to. I mean, I'm not
Mhm.
saying we shouldn't go, but I am saying that we do need to be very careful about these environments because we don't really understand them,
Hmm.
and they are in a sense pristine, and they are this sort of virginal sense of it had never been touched, and here we're going to go just screw it all up. Um, I understand that, but
Mhm.
I do think though that and I don't really like to talk this way very often, but I do think that in some sense it is a destiny. It's sort of like something we're
Sure.
just gonna
Yeah.
do it. You know what I mean? I mean, you really can't.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you can do it, so you're gonna do it.
Hmm. Yeah, I
You know,
get
like
that.
like Elon putting chips in our brains. It's like somebody's gonna do it. You know,
Might as well
now
be
I'm,
Elon.
I'm actually much more terrified of the chips in our brains than I am of us going to the moon.
Yeah.
Uh, that feels scarier to me. I'm not as excited about that.
Well, I was
Yeah.
on my favorite website, qsource.com, the other day, and so you can pick up all the protection against the chips in your brain if you want it from qsource.com.
Is that
I'm
really
just kidding. I'm
is
just
that a, is
kidding.
that
I don't know. I'm sure there's something called QSource that's all of your protections against things in the QAnon theory. Uh, yeah,
a source?
look. I mean, I love humanity. Every person I love is a human. I'm a human. I get it.
Every person I
But
love is a
but we
human.
but we have a track record as a species, that's mixed, right? The same period of time we were shooting these cats up to the moon the first time, we were terrifying children with shark movies, and we've saved humanity and we've enslaved humanity. It's a mixed record.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
we're gonna go to the moon. I guess it just feels, and maybe this is for another generation to say, yeah, when I was a child, y- um, yeah, I think about people older than us who would say, yeah, when I was a kid, it was almost unimaginable that someone would walk on the moon. And then for us, it's like, no, I get it. People walk on the moon. That, I'm thinking someone living there or like a permanent presence, like an office for space science and
Yeah,
stuff. That feels like it's just another deal. And maybe the next, maybe your grandchildren will look and say like, oh no, I totally get that. They've people been living on
right,
the moon my whole life. It'll
right.
just be sort of
Hey,
normalized. But it
Yeah,
does seem like a
I'm sort of
moment to
bummed
pay
that
attention to.
it's sort of a bummer it's taken this long to have a moon base. Like
yeah,
Hmm.
science fiction has been there for 100 years, you know.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, and it seemed like it was a bit out of favor. Hey, and then there's these photos from the first time we went. Are we going to put any of those up?
Oh
Because these
yeah.
things are just something else. Apollo 17. I don't remember the year, Paul, because you're a student of all this. Literally, you probably know when Apollo 17 went to the moon.
I'm guessing it was 72, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
been
Because
50 years,
50
so
years, so it was
72.
72. In fact, it was 50 years ago this week that we last walked on the moon. So that sort of gives you a sense. Remember a few years ago when we
Wow.
celebrated the Apollo 11?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? So that's
Yep.
the span of time that we were on the moon from then till now. That's how much time we were on the moon
yeah, it's really just a
from
few years.
2019, basically just during the COVID era from mid 2019 until now. That's the span of time that we were on the moon, just a few years.
Mhm.
And by on the moon, you mean we had different trips going back and forth to the
Yeah,
moon?
yeah.
Yeah.
That is the window of time that people were actually actively going to the moon. is not very long. You know, just 2.5
Yeah.
years, I guess.
Because it's sort of like we beat the Russians, mission
3.5 years.
accomplished, and then the excitement and the funding kind of dried up, right? Like there wasn't that sense of urgency to keep going.
But, you know, you mentioned the Russians, and that's one thing. I'm actually more concerned, you know, this thing about the moon, going to the moon, the politics of it is,
Yeah.
you know, like, you know, it's going to be like a land grab or something.
Well,
know?
I just saw a sort of disturbing headline that NASA is purchasing lightweight, like, assault rifles. And it's like, why does NASA need guns? Like,
guns on the moon.
Do they think there's people living on the other side of the moon we haven't seen? Is there a theory afoot that there might be a little?
No, but the Chinese won't be far behind. You know.
Yeah.
I mean,
did you all watch For All Mankind, that TV show? Oh, it's so good. It's like an alternate history of the space race, but they end up, bringing guns to the moon and having shootouts, of course.
Okay. Really?
That's kind of disappointing.
We should bring a projectile firing device.
Seems like a very bad idea.
You know,
this is why they don't have money. This is why they have to strip the parts and they don't get money, because someone around there is also saying, you know, Second Amendment counts on the moon. You know, you still have the right. It's not it's a concealed carry state.
Hey, space law. How about that? You know, it's kind of disappointing to think that, you know, when there's a war on the moon, that we're going to be using bullets and not like lasers and stuff.
Yeah, no lightsabers.
You know? Like, really, bullets? Like,
that's a great point.
Like pieces of metal, you know, and not like light. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's just Star Wars. That's Star Wars working on me right there.
Right. Well, to get back to these photos, they've apparently remastered these photos from 50 years ago. And if you're just listening on the podcast, make sure you hop over to the show notes and we'll put a link to this article with all these photos, because they're just great. These guys, like the one we're looking at right now is astronaut Eugene Carmen or Cernan. I don't know.
Cernan.
And he's just got done with a moonwalk. He's like covered in moon dust and like
just a badass.
Yeah, just
total complete. Like, I am so much cooler than anyone else at this moment.
Coolest, sexiest man alive. That guy right there sitting in that space. Okay, here's the thing that gets me about these photos. I understand they've now remastered them and done some digital stuff to make them clear. But they were taking photos that were incredible inside of the Apollo 17 spacecraft and on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, do you know anything about that? Like what kind of technology? Because I know weight was such a big issue for them, and like what they're going to take up there with them. They were working on ounces, like dehydrating food, so they didn't carry so much. And then they come home with like a 35 millimeter roll of film that is incredible photos.
I don't know what technology it was, but do you remember that movie that came out about Apollo 11 back in 2019 with the original footage?
Yes. Yeah, we talked about that. I cried in that film. The quality
of those images and those films were phenomenal. I could not believe we had the technology to make such beautiful. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. It was like 19th century, but I was amazed at the quality of those films.
Absolutely.
Were taken in '69, and I don't know. I'm sure that whatever they had on board Apollo 17 here for these pictures was probably the highest technology imaging equipment you could get at the time. But yeah, the weight issue, I never thought about that. I guess it was just really important to them to document the thing.
Yeah, incredible. And they're selfies. Like these cats are shooting selfies, you know, or, you know, his buddies just. And again, do you remember back in the day when it was film, and if you went on some event or family trip or anything, you're like counting up the number of film canisters you're bringing, and this is a 36 exposure.
Oh yeah.
And you're clicking, and in back of your mind, you have to keep track of, okay, we have 22 pictures left on the trip.
Yeah.
These guys are in the same.
You had to be careful when you took them. You had to be really intentional about when you took pictures.
Everything. So these guys are like, this is my one shot on the moon. Don't screw
Yep.
this up. You know, you have 11,
Yeah.
whatever.
And you
There's
don't know
some
if it's
set
turned
number.
out until you get back to Earth and
Right.
develop them. Like,
And wait a few days. Yeah. Oh, go back to that picture, Dan,
How do
of the
people live
previous
like
one
that?
of the crescent Earth. I just love that picture.
yeah,
That is
incredible.
phenomenal.
So you have the
do they
moon
fake that, Paul?
horizon. How do they fake that?
Because that really does look like someone's on the moon and the
They're
Earth,
really
which
good.
is round.
That was actually probably taken from the orbiter. But yeah, that is a phenomenal picture. What a shot. My goodness.
It really does. I mean, I'm not a lunar denier, but I can see how people would see this stuff, and like the things we're talking about would be like, yeah, seriously, you think those guys are up there with those cameras and they're catching those shots, and the guy just happened to frame up that dune buggy driving across the moon and just nailed it perfectly.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, there is a sense of the way this was it all went, that everything worked. You know, I know there was the Houston, there's a problem moment, but in that whole go to the moon period from whatever it was, 68 to 72, it all worked. Like it really is magnificent, what was accomplished. And like we're saying, it is truly a lifetime ago, 50 years.
Yeah. I'm looking at this picture of the Earth down there, and I'm thinking, I'm on that planet, and I'm 4.
Great line. That's right.
You know, I can't quite tell what continent is showing there, but you know, I'm down there, and you're down there, Doug. Dan hadn't been invented yet.
Nope.
Huh? That was a pre-Dan Earth. Look at that.
PD.
Pre-Dan.
Pre-Dan, exactly.
Pre-Dan. Paul, what as you've heard now, when you're in the space world, as you are, look at that photo. That's just incredible. The guy's shadow is in it. I mean, these guys are artsy. And again, where'd the lighting for that come from? I mean, I have shot 1,000 photos with my, $700 iPhone camera. Can't seem to get that. These guys are literally on the moon with a Kodachrome, and they're getting this shot with the lighting just stellar. Somebody should look up the 50 years later remastered images of Apollo 17 news article, because the photos are just stunning. How they pull that off. Paul, what are people like you in your industry learning about this work that we're doing right now, with Artemis up there, that's new or surprising, or are they just like running through the paces and making sure everything works? Is this basically a big expensive checklist that they've gone through, or is it a new things
big
learned?
Expensive checklist, and I don't understand. I don't really know the differences in the technology. I do know that the Space Launch System, basically the thing that gets Orion up there, is it's a little smaller, I guess, not quite as tall as the Apollo rockets, but it's like 8 times more powerful or something like that. So the technology, it looks very much the same, but the technology is definitely different. And of course, the computers on board and so forth are, infinitely further along. But I don't know a lot of people who are working directly with it. I'm more on the astronomy research, telescope side of things, and not so much the engineering, space vehicle, side of things.
I have a friend whose daughter is working out at MIT in the some department that's called something like you just described there, like spacecraft vehicle something or another. And she's in the support side for the people doing that kind of work. And what struck me when he told me this story was just sort of realizing that at MIT, and I'm sure at Stanford, and I'm guessing there's other major educational centers where they're really training up these people to be developing the vehicles that are going to be taking people around in space, that it's thousands of people doing this. Like there's specialized engineers who are doing it, but the infrastructure around making this kind of thing happen is really quite
It's
robust.
enormous. And that's actually my first argument against people who think it was all posed and all just conspiracy.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, Apollo required hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Don't you think that somebody who was supposed to have been working on it, who wasn't working on it, out of hundreds of thousands of people would have eventually said, you know what? I said I was working on it, but I didn't.
Yeah.
Right. In an age where publicity, everybody wants to be on the internet for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Somebody would have blown the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
That's my first argument. Is it's just not, you just disconnected from reality if you think that it was conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because and this one too, thousands upon thousands of dedicated, smart people are working on this.
Yeah, at every level of what it takes for someone to spend the next 30 years. These folks working there at MIT. Some of them are doctoral students and postdoctoral students in their 20s, early 30s. They're going to spend 30 years working on a craft that's maybe gonna be on the moon or get to Mars or something like that. It's an entire life that they're going to spend a work life producing the wheels or the propulsion pack or whatever it is that they're
entire careers. I think of like missions that didn't make it, like the Mars orbiter that crashed because somebody didn't do a conversion correctly, like from metric to imperial units. And like somebody spent 15 years of their lives. Many people spent years of their lives working on this thing. And that's an object lesson every time any physics teacher talks about converting units.
That's a true story that there was an accident.
That's a true story. The Mars, look it up, Mars, or I think that's the name. Mars orbiter it was kind of a generic name, but it's called the Mars orbiter, and it crashed. I think it fell into, I don't know if it went off into space or crashed into Mars now. It's been a long time.
Now, I know it's not as simple as couldn't figure out how many ounces were in a 2-liter,
basically though,
to know how much, if you need 2 or 3 of them to have the party. But is it really something that simple, or was this really complex math that there was a conversion problem?
I mean, it was more complicated math than. But I mean, within the complicated math, there are conversions, and there was a mistake, or maybe a series of mistakes. I never actually saw the actual conversions themselves, but it's documented that it was a conversion problem. And it's no more. And conversions are conversions, right? They're within complicated math, but the conversion itself is no different than the ounces to.
I see. Yeah.
To gallons thing or whatever.
And this coming from a guy who teaches complicated math, like you know complicated math.
I know some complicated math. Yeah.
What's the most complicated math you know? Is there another name for it? Like, or is it just
probably the most difficult math I've ever dealt with has to do with tensors. It has to do with general relativity and these mathematical objects called tensors. But theoretical physics gets far more complicated than that.
What's a tensor? I love this part of it.
A tensor basically is a mathematical object that describes the curvature, and in the application that they're used for other things than this, but I use them, and the application I used them for was tensors tell you how describe the curvature of space-time.
Oh wow, my brain already hurts.
It's basically the mathematics of Einstein's relativity from 1915.
And often when I see that math, there's a series of symbols that I've never seen used anywhere else. Is this that way? There's a language.
Yeah, well,
it's like Egyptian hieroglyphics. Like...
it's just Greek, but
it's a woman with a basket in her hand.
It's almost all Greek letters. There's lambdas and there's alphas and betas.
Really?
But yeah, it's a beautiful thing to behold. But yeah, it is. Believe me, it is.
Okay.
the beauty comes as the meaning of it sort of slowly gets like unveiled to you as you pound your head against the wall for months trying to figure it out, and over time you start to you have these moments, where like, oh
Wow.
my God, I get it now. That's what you live for. Just moments where it's just like all of a sudden this door opens up that you've been pushing on for weeks and months.
Is there a package of gummies laying somewhere nearby, just around the time when that happens, when you get that little epiphany? Now I see it, man. Now
it's a natural
It's
high,
beautiful.
baby.
Okay,
It's beautiful.
yeah,
It's a natural
what people
high.
talk about. That's what the gummy people talk about. It's just all natural, baby.
Yeah.
Paul, in the educational world, anything big afoot? Anything happening, or is there a guy running around with a paper, or a person arguing to get in front of a conference somewhere that's got something going on that you know about?
Not that I know of. No, I haven't been to a physics conference in a little while, basically since pre-COVID. I haven't been to a physics or astronomy conference. I may start traveling again. I don't know if you know, but I used to be a professor and a pastor at the same time. But my pastor job, I resigned from that, and now I'm full-time professoring.
Okay.
So maybe I'll get back around to it soon. But I haven't been to one in a while, so I'm not able to keep up the way I like. I've seen some good talks. Lately, though, we have a series of open houses here at the observatory, and people who are astronomers, astrophysicists come in and give talks once a month. And saw some good talks about habitable planets, searching for possible signs of life in the stellar neighborhood. By that, stellar neighborhood means within about 50 light years or so of the Earth.
Yeah.
So a couple hurdles to jump before we can get there, but
the Mars looks like a cakewalk compared to traveling out to some of these systems.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I asked that is because it seems like there was a period of time in which what we've been talking about here, getting to the moon and all, the 1960s was preceded by a lot of fresh science thinking in the 50s. And that, of course, was preceded by a lot of those fresh science thinking from the turn of the 20th century into the 20s. Like that was a period of time. There was about 50 or 60 years when across the sciences, but especially in the looking up sciences, were really explosive in theories and ideas and things being proven.
Yeah. Well,
it feels like now that's not so much the case, and I don't know if that, or it's not as popularized or something. I don't know.
There's a couple of big issues that are definitely unresolved, and now that I see your question, there are definitely some questions that are not resolved, and the biggest one has to do with the discovery that occurred about 20 years ago, which is the fact, we've known since 30s, 40s that the universe is expanding, that it's, things are getting further and further apart. But what we discovered in 1999, I suppose it was, almost 25 years ago, was that the expansion is speeding up. Okay, two separate groups individually discovered that the expansion of the universe is accelerating.
Huh.
That's so weird.
Yeah, that is so weird. Because this was not a result that people expected. This is a case where you think you know what nature is doing until you look.
Yeah,
and
you would think
it turns out that things are not what you expected, and so figuring out why that is, it feels like, at least within the astronomy world, it feels like we're at this moment where things are just as confused as things were before Copernicus showed up.
That's awesome.
Because this question is, no pun intended, is so big. It's so fundamental. Nobody knows what the mechanism is for this acceleration, because the only force that we know of that acts across great distances is gravity, and it's always attractive, and that should slow things down. So there's something else acting out there that is huge, and we don't know what it is. We call it dark energy, but calling it that, of course, the name itself indicates that we have no clue what it is.
Yeah. I don't know why
Dark
that
energy.
idea is just existentially terrifying, that there's this force out there working on
It's kind of an
all of the
anti-gravity
heavenly
force.
bodies.
Yeah. And then separately from that, and sort of somewhat, it's still a big deal, but not as big of a deal, is another dark thing called dark matter. And there's evidence that there's mass out there, and we don't know what the world it is. It's extra mass. And I don't mean just like a few percent. I mean like most of the mass in the universe is this dark matter. And we've been looking for it for 50 years, and we can't find it.
But the math points to its existence, right?
That's kind of one of the issues, is that, well, was our math wrong? Maybe general relativity, which I was just talking about, Einstein's theory of gravity, maybe it's not.
Did he switch it? Did he switch it from metric to maybe?
Are they talking liters or ounces here?
Oh, by the way, you mentioned that. And I need to say, I don't know why it is. Maybe there's got to be a story here. Why there's two places where the metric system has pushed its way into Americans' daily lives, and one of them is liters.
Yep.
The soda
soft
pop
drinks in
aisle is all
hospitals.
liters, and milk is gallons, and also watts. Like your light bulbs are measured in watts.
As opposed to what?
That's also a lumens. I can't remember. I don't even know what the imperial. I'm a physicist and been teaching physics for 25 years at the college level, and I don't even know what the exact unit is in the imperial system. Lumens. I don't even know.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But anyway, that's just that's an aside. Those are two places where the final pocket of resistance to the metric system here in America there's a couple holes, chinks in the armor.
Yeah.
So dark
Paul,
matter.
since you're a pastor and an astrophysicist, have you suggested that thing in space they don't know that you can't explain could be Jesus? Have you suggested that to the kids yet?
Dark Jesus.
Dark Jesus.
Dark Jesus is just pushing
Dark Brandon
expansion faster, that he's behind it. He's like shoving it forward.
As far along as we are trying to figure it out, that sounds about as good as any other explanation.
It ranks right up there. I'm guessing that there's a lot of people who do those, in all seriousness, when something in space or science is unexplainable, they go to there's spiritual forces or godlike features that are going to be undiscoverable by the human mind.
Yeah. Like the other day I was talking to a student, and she was asking a great question, which is, why does the solar system all rotate in the same direction?
It's a great question.
Where that rotation came from. And I started talking about it, told her where it came from. And I said, but the initial rotation, nothing really, that was just present already based on the initial conditions, whatever. And I basically made the point that nothing really got it started. And she's like,
That's what I thought.
Paul, let me tell you about a friend of mine.
I didn't ask her to explain that, but I know she was thinking, the picture I had in my mind was God reached in, and kind of just
the first mover.
The first mover, basically.
Yeah.
Prime mover.
I think there's a lot of people for whom that sort of fits and works. The God
for
of
generations we've done that, and as science has evolved and our knowledge has grown, we've filled in the gaps. But we've always looked at the stars and been like, well, that can't be anything that makes sense other than a divine being.
Yeah, that's a dangerous road. You start going down that road, and God's everywhere or God's nowhere. It's like God is like this idea that God kind of just got it wound up and let it rip. And that
the worst. It's a worse version, isn't it? Yeah.
This idea that God hides in the places of our ignorance and not in the places of our knowledge is like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's a whole thing going on there. It's probably got something to do with a mom or dad that wasn't around enough to fulfill the emotional needs of a person, or they found themselves in a movie theater in Hopkins, Minnesota in 1975.
Comes back to Jaws.
Comes back to Jaws. Comes back to those traumatic early events. Doesn't it,
floating in the water. And
what I really like, Doug, is the way you took that individual traumatic event and you projected it onto society onto the
As a
globe,
whole.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really a nice move. I like
that movie is so in our culture. It's playing on an airplane right now, like unbelievable.
One time I took a plane to Hawaii, and I kid you not, what movie they showed was Volcano. that disaster movie about
Yeah.
volcanoes. Speaking of which, is that thing still going off in Hawaii right now?
Think it is, right? Like
Yeah,
first time
Yeah.
in 50
40
years or
years. Yeah, 40,
something.
50 years, something like that. Wow.
So,
Awesome.
we do have going on. We got a 50-year theme happening here. And this is okay. My last note, sort of
You
on,
get
we're
into
looking at these photos.
non-identical repetition cycles
Yeah,
here.
we should suggest a little non-identical repetition. A great phrase and concept. All the things happen over and over, but not exactly the same. But you're in a repeating pattern. It's really great.
That's a
Great
new
notion.
phrase for me. I like that.
Yeah, non-identical repetition. I first heard that phrase and the concept from some religious people talking about why they do communion all the time, and they were talking about that action being connected to the Passover meal that Jesus participated in. Anyway. But anyway, I thought it was a much better idea for just explaining a lot of the realities of our lived experience than just the religious piece. Non-identical repetition. But as we get further away from, and maybe this is just people in their 50s, what they say, you look back 50 years ago, and it's kind of evident that there was a lot of really great stuff happening back then, in 1965 to 2022. Like, that's been a really great period. That when you're living in it, it can always feel like the past was more romantic and great discoveries, and the future is going to be that way. And whatever you're living in sort of feels like, well, this is the stupid time to live. But then you start looking back at these periods and just all the little discoveries and the things that happened in culture and in science and in religion and in food, and it's really something. As I mentioned, we were on vacation. We went to Cancun, Mexico area, and like Cancun, Mexico, and people from the United States and around the world going to that part of the Gulf of Mexico for vacation is an innovation that was started in the 1970s. Like early, the whole place was built then, like airplane, like a whole lot of things came together. There's all this, I don't know, there's kind of this 50-year retrospective that I'm vibing in 50 or 60 years of like, what, there's just really crazy amount of things, that can make it seem that period feel really, really quite wonderful and fantastic. And I'm sure science is that way too.
Yeah, it is. It is. But you know what I like? I got to tell you, Doug, I was thinking what I like about you. I like a lot of things about one of the things I really like about you is just now you were talking about how the past might seem kind of, you sort of cast it in a positive light, oh, it was so good back then. And then you said, and the future's kind of the same way.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's Doug's optimism that I like right there. Cause like for me, the future's like, oh my God, what the hell? I feel like running from it, but I appreciate that about you, Doug. This idea that the future is gonna be good. And the older I get, actually, the more I'm thinking that the future will be, is not as scary as as all that.
Yeah, I mean, what possible evidence is there to the human experience that the future is going to be worse than now?
Yeah.
Right. What you want to pick a time in the last, I don't know, pick it 100,000 years when you'd rather have been alive than right now.
Right.
Not saying everything is great. Everything's set.
No,
but everything was worse. Everything. There's not a thing.
True. That's true.
Yeah, that's true. If you look over the long term, that's true. I mean, who is some philosopher? Is it Pinker? Somebody has this book basically about how everything all the time is getting better, and despite our fears and despite all the crap and all the difficulties, that if you look over human history, things are actually getting better, like in every possible category.
Yes, which is true. The one thing people say is, well, there was pre-industrialized civilizations, indigenous civilizations all over the world. We don't know so much what, there may have been an afternoon there where things were just really idyllic and sort of perfect. But we have this idea, right? Religion gives us this, but so do a lot of other culture, that there was an Eden at some previous time when everything was perfect, and we've been on a de-evolutionary slide since. That notion that got stuck in our heads because a bunch of kings endorsed theologians that wanted to control them and wanted to keep people from aspiring to a more beautiful future. That thing is so alive and well in our, and it must play somehow into the human tendency because people really buy into it. But it's just simply not the case. Everything everywhere is better than it was 200 years ago.
Almost.
Yeah, well, see, I'm not necessarily saying,
except our rainforests, and
I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with Pinker, but I do think that there is something to his argument, and that saying that the old times were so much better, that whole thing is is completely off, is completely wrong. I think it's fully wrong. It's just saying the old times were better. That's just not right. And I was born between the assassinations of RFK and MLK. Right in that window, and my parents talked to me about it. That was just a horrifically stressful time in America.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it was better than today, but
no, I hear. Yeah, it's not to say there aren't more bad moments, but that period of 1968 was better than 1860.
Yeah, right.
That was better than 1760.
Yeah,
that was better than. I mean, the one thing Dan brings up a good point is there's been some ecological effect to parts of our planet because of industrialization that have taken a.
That's a lesson that's another lesson we need to learn and going forward if we're going to be colonizing the moon and other planets and so forth. We need to really take this lesson.
Yeah. And we have all the
better
knowledge.
Than the Ice Age. Much better than the Ice Age.
So much better.
About little lost
the Ice Age.
Reefs, the Ice Age was horrible.
That's a real bummer. Yeah.
That sucked.
Hey, before we sign off, I want to give a podcast recommendation. Maybe you two have listened to this, but it's from the BBC. It's called 13 Minutes to the Moon. And the first season just goes, it follows exactly the 13 minutes prior to touchdown for the first lunar landing. And it uses all the original audio and then interviews with surviving crew members and people that were a part of the team. Just an incredible podcast. And then season 2 is Apollo 13. And so it goes minute by minute through Apollo 13, and again, interviews with the people that were in the module and people on the ground. Just really fascinating. And it gets into, it talks about, we were talking about how many people it takes to land someone on the moon. And they are interviewing the people that are in the control center and talking about how everyone at one of those little desks had a team in the back of dozens of people working on problems, and that team had people scattered across the country that they could call on to figure things out. So like Apollo 13,
it wasn't just the dudes in the big control room. They were just the top of the pyramid, basically.
Right. Yeah. Really good though.
I gotta say that sounds fantastic. I'm gonna check that out. And I'm also gonna say that I love good titles. That's a phenomenal title. 13 Minutes to the Moon. Wow, that makes me want to watch it.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal title. Wow.
13 Minutes to the Moon. All right. Well, I've got something to do today. I'm glad. I was going to keep talking here because I'd kind of run out of stuff to do for the afternoon. So that freed up my afternoon. Took up my afternoon. All right, Paul Wallace. Well, keep us up to date. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right.
And happy Christmas and December things, whatever it is you do in December.
Same to y'all.
Okay. Everybody, but Dan, are we going to be back on tomorrow? Should we be? Now that, we've been off for
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
I feel like we got some stuff to talk about. I don't know.
A
Lot's happened.
Yeah, a lot.
Me and Rob covered it a little bit yesterday. Some of
the oh, you did?
Yeah, we got into some politics.
Great.
Well, Tuesday. I didn't even know what day it is.
Boy, what a time for politics. My God.
What a time to be alive.
What a time.
Better than any other time.
Other than day after tomorrow. Day after tomorrow, the only better time to live than today. So hang in there if you can until day after tomorrow. Things are really going to look up. Things are going to be better.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see you all tomorrow if things don't break.
All right.